Hello and welcome to A Historian Reacts. Today we are going to be talking about the 2016 TV series Medici Masters of Florence. I will do an episode on season 2. It's called Medici the Magnificent. Not sure if I'm going to squeeze them into one video or if I'm going to do 2 separate videos. So this might go either way. But here we go. I'm wearing my very fancy regal looking earrings today. I thought they were quite Florentine looking for the occasion. And I tried to do a cut crease with gold and like a pinky red, but I don't really think it went to plan. So we're just gonna ignore that. Anyway, without further ado, you're here for historical content and historical accuracy of TV series, films, books, etc. So that is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Medici, Masters of Florence. So without further ado, here we go. Point number 1, the Medici men were not very good looking, certainly not as good looking as they are portrayed to be in Masters of Florence. Hereditary diseases like gout and arthritis plagued the family, and they also would have been completely clean shaven. They would not have had the cute little beard that Cosimo and many of the men do have, but I completely understand why you want to have a handsome protagonist, particularly Richard Madden. So Giovanni's murder, Dad's murder. Remember at the beginning with the grape and it's poisoned by the hemlock, and oh my god! And this is a major plot point throughout the series, actually, but never happened. Giovanni died on February the 20th, 1429. February is not the season for grape eating. He wasn't murdered at all. It's just an exciting plot point. I don't really know what more I can tell you. Sorry. The role of Contessina, although it was an arranged marriage, they did have a very good and loving relationship that produced 2 sons, Piero and Giovanni. She didn't really interfere much in the politics or the banking business, and she certainly did not ride a horse into the Hall of the 200 and address the Signoria and petition them for her husband to not be executed but exiled. It was the other Italian states that actually petitioned to have his sentence commuted to exile. Yeah, sorry. I love that scene. I really love that scene, but never happened. Contessina would have entertained important guests. She would have forged alliances and connections. She would have arranged marriages for noble families. She would have schmoozed. She would have networked. She would have greased palms. She would have been doing a lot behind the scenes. But anything so public, no. She was a very trusted confidant of Cosimo's behind closed doors. But no, not seen to be doing anything like that in public. She was heavily involved in her children and grandchildren's lives, and we know that she was very close to her grandson Lorenzo, as we see in season 2, The Magnificent, and yeah, not a lot more to say about that. Bianca, Cosimo's lover in Rome. Let's talk about her. Nothing is known about Cosimo's love life before his marriage to Contessina. Maddalena, the slave Cosimo brings back from Venice, however, did exist. And they did have a son, Carlo, who Contessina raised as her own. He later became a priest, devoting his life to the church, and Maddalena's fate from that point on is unknown. Cosimo wasn't poisoned in prison. Cosimo was constantly paranoid about being poisoned. This was the age of the Borgia, after all, and refused all food brought to him during his imprisonment in the Palazzo Vecchio's tower. He actually bribed the jailer so that he could be brought meals that were prepared for him at home. But again, an interesting plot point. Lorenzo's marriage and death. Now, brother Lorenzo is portrayed as a womanizer who loses his heart to Rosa and never marries. Rosa never existed. Lorenzo did in fact actually marry in 1416, aged 21, with Ginevra de Cavalcanti, and they had 2 sons. Lorenzo's great-grandson Cosimo, I know they like to name the kids after the brothers and the granddads. It's very confusing. How do you think I feel? I have an Italian family. And I'm trying to do the family tree. So anyway, Lorenzo's great-grandson Cosimo would later become Cosimo I de' Medici, Grand Duke of Florence, in 1569. An accomplice of the Pazzi family did not kill Lorenzo. He died aged 45 in 1440 in the family villa, and his cause of death is unknown. So then this takes us on to the death of Rinaldo degli Albizzi. Albizzi did not come to a violent end in a Tuscan forest after Cosimo's big rival was exiled from Florence. Rinaldo was indeed banished from the city, that is true, and he never returned to Florence, but he died after 8 years in exile in 1442 at the grand old age of 72 years old in Ancona. But again, good plot point. The Duomo. A lot of scenes were filmed around the Duomo and St. John's Baptistry to form... Sorry, it's not very professional, is it? Which form a very impressive backdrop. Nobody can lie about that. However, the Duomo wasn't actually completed as we know it today until 1887. The baptistry was filmed as it stands today. I had watched the series before I actually went to Florence in November. Look out for the Herstory episodes that I'm going to do. I'm going to do three from my Florentine exploits. And it was just like walking into the film. And then I came back and my partner was interested in watching it, so I watched it again, and it's exactly as it is today. They've just literally closed off the baptistry to film, I think. The dome of the Basilica of San Lorenzo, which is my most favourite church in all of Florence. If you're ever there, please go. And might just be because of my interest in this period of history, particularly this point in the Medici history, and that's where they're all buried. But I thought the Basilica of San Lorenzo was the most glorious, gorgeous building in all of Florence. I thought the Duomo and the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore did not touch it. So it's a small church, but please do go and have a look because I love it, and I think it was my partner's favourite building as well. Anyway, going off topic, the dome of the Basilica of San Lorenzo, which was the parish family church, also did not yet have its Cupola de Principe, which is this big red dome. The chapel itself was built in 1604, so that wouldn't have been there at that point. The Ponte Vecchio also and the Vasari corridor is shown as complete during the series. However, the kilometre-long corridor connecting the Palazzo Vecchio and the Palazzo Pitti on the south bank of the Arno wasn't built until 1565. So the Palazzo Vecchio is the government building, the Palazzo Pitti is the palace on the other side of the river. It was built by architect Giorgio Vasari, and it was commissioned by Grand Duke Cosimo, who I think we said was great-grandson of Cosimo's brother Lorenzo. So yeah, wasn't there when this was filmed. Cosimo was not a wannabe artist forced to become a banker. He was a staunch patron of the arts, that is very true, but beneath his modest exterior, he was a Machiavellian power broker. He was ruthless. He used strategic patronage to elevate the family's position to unquestionable dominance over the city. And you only have to look at the Duomo to see that. The funding of the Duomo was as much a patronage of architecture and a love of architecture as it was a move to have this physical symbol of Medici power looming over the whole of Florence constantly. And you could see it from all around, from all over Tuscany, basically. You could see this symbol of Medici power. And a couple of final points. There is no historical evidence to support the existence of Marco Bello. Though it kind of makes sense that if you were a family like that, with a lot of enemies and a lot of political influence, you probably would have someone like that in your employ. We just don't have any historical evidence of it, that's all. The plague did sweep through Florence many times, but didn't cause the workers to dismantle the cathedral dome, and certainly did not kill Piccarda, Cosimo's mother. His twin brother also is this mysterious plot point that we never really get to the bottom to. He died in infancy, and this wasn't something Cosimo could have prevented. It's not something he could have been blamed for not saving him, and it's not something that would fill him with guilt and like eat him up for the rest of his life. So not sure what that's about. So there we go. That is my entire list of all the historical inaccuracies in Medici Masters of Florence, but I loved it nonetheless. I love series on the Italian Renaissance anyway. The things I've seen on the Borgias as well, they always seem to focus on that incestuous relationship between Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia, and we know that's not true, and we know that was just slanderous stuff put about, but people go for it anyway, and I love it. I'm a viewer as much as a historian, so do go and watch Medici Masters of Florence, because it will give you a really good understanding of what life was like at the time, and it will kind of help you get to know Cosimo and Contessina. I think they've portrayed them quite well as characters. Yeah, I think they've done a pretty good job, and I really enjoyed it. I'm just being picky, and that's why you're here, isn't it? Because you're picky too, and you want to know all the bits that aren't true as well. Now I'm just in over 12 minutes. Normally my videos go for about half an hour, so I'm going to carry on and do Medici the Magnificent. So there we go. So Medici the Magnificent, series 2. This picks up with Cosimo's grandson Lorenzo. So you've got Cosimo and Contessina in series 1. They have a son called Piero, and their daughter-in-law Lucrezia are featured quite heavily during the series. This is about their sons, predominantly their son Lorenzo, who goes on to be called Lorenzo the Magnificent, and that's why it's Medici the Magnificent. So we're skipping a generation. We're kind of skipping Piero the Gouty. Poor Piero the Gouty. What a name. So we're kind of skipping poor Piero the Gouty. He is in there, but he's not the main focus. Bless him. We're kind of skipping a generation. So firstly, I think this series is a lot more factually accurate I will say that much. The main point, the main thing that people ask is about the Pazzi conspiracy, the Pazzi rebellion and the assassination of Giuliano. Is it true? Did it happen? Yes, it is true. It did happen on the 26th of April, 1478, in the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, underneath the Duomo, in the middle of Easter Mass, while the priest was performing communion. Both brothers were set upon with knives by the Pazzis. Lorenzo did escape inside the sacristy, while Giuliano was stabbed to death by Francesco de Pazzi with over 19 stab wounds to his body. The Pazzis after this were either killed or exiled. They were not hung from, they did not have ropes tied around their necks and were booted out the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio. Unfortunately, that was a death reserved for commoners, hanging. But it was a really good scene. That was good TV. I'm not going to take that away. I wish they had done that. Like, I wish that was true. Hi, Herstory gang. It's future Emma here. It's a bit strange, I know, but I'm recording this about 2 weeks after I recorded the Historian Reacts to Medici, the Magnificent and Medici Masters of Florence. We've had a bit of an update. I was just kind of scrolling through and I found a picture that Leonardo da Vinci had drawn of one of the Pazzi conspirators actually being hanged. So I did a little bit of digging and I found out that the Pazzis were actually hung and booted out of the window of the Palazzo Vecchio. So sorry, my computer glare is really bad. So the historians and researchers working on the show must have had a really, really intense knowledge of what actually happened. So here is what actually happened. 5 Pazzi conspirators, including Francesco and Salviati, were hung from the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio. Jacopo, the dad, managed to escape Florence, but he was caught and brought back. He was tortured and hanged next to the decomposing body of Salviati. He was buried at the Basilica of Santa Croce, but his body was dug up, thrown into a ditch, and then found by some other people, dragged through the streets and propped up at the doors of the Palazzo Pazzi. Cardinal Raffaele Riario was the only one I could find that was spared. Between the 26th of April, when the attack happened, and the 20th of October 1478, a total of 80 conspirators were hunted down and executed. Some had even travelled as far as Constantinople, which is crazy. The Pazzi were banished from Florence, their lands and properties were confiscated, their names were erased from public registers, all buildings and streets carrying their name had to be renamed, their shield, which had dolphins all over it, they were destroyed. Anyone married to a Pazzi couldn't hold public office. Basically, anyone that was called Pazzi changed their name. You might be wondering what happened to Lorenzo's sister Bianca, who married Guillermo de Pazzi. Right? He was placed under house arrest and later banished to Torre Decima near Ponticiev. Ponticiev, I think I've written that properly. It wasn't until after the overthrow of Piero de' Medici, this is Piero the Unfortunate, Lorenzo the Magnificent's son, not his dad, Piero the Gouty. So Lorenzo the Magnificent's son, Piero the Unfortunate,
was overthrown in 1494, and the Pazzis gradually started to trickle back into Florence. So there you go, historical correction. That is one thing I love about history. We are always finding out new stuff. We are always finding new angles to things, and we are always our perception of history is always changing, which is brilliant. But anyway, back to your regularly scheduled program. Anyway, the Medici family at this point had effectively, if not officially, been ruling Florence for a century, and were well established as nobles and bankers, thanks a lot to what Cosimo had been doing in Masters of Florence. Lucrezia Donati, or Lucretia Donati, as I think she's referred to in Da Vinci's Demons, may be referred to in this as well. I can't remember if they call her Lucretia or Lucrezia. Lucretia Donati, Lorenzo's lover. She was real. However, their relationship has gone down in history as being pretty platonic. Lorenzo was kind of obsessed with her. He wrote lots of love poems to her, but there's no proof they had a physical, intimate relationship. She was married. I don't think she was really that interested in him. Maybe liked him as a friend, but he was a good friend to have, and he was quite a good person to have fancy you, I think. Lorenzo was married to Clarice Orsini, who was nowhere near as headstrong in real life as she is in the series. While he was ambitious and gregarious and the life and soul of the party, she was pious and shy and traditional. She'd come from a Roman family, so it was a bit of a shock to go from strict Catholicism and no nakedness and no shenanigans and no naughty business to Florence, where all the statues have got their winkies out. That was a bit of a shock for her, so she adjusted, but she was never as outlandish as Lorenzo was. They did have a massive mutual respect for one another though, and they ended up having 10 children together. Obviously not all of them survived to adulthood, but they ended up having 10 children together, so they must have liked each other. A little bit, you know. So let's talk about Giuliano and Simonetta Catigliano. Can't read my own writing. Simonetta Catigliano. This is born from a poem by Politano, who we see in the series. In this poem, he commemorates a joust that was won by Giuliano in 1475, in which he dedicates his victory to Simonetta. She was real. She was a notoriously admired Florentine beauty. She was married to a man called Marco Vespucci. If you recognise that surname, it's because his cousin was Amerigo Vespucci, the famous explorer who supposedly discovered America. Amerigo. Anyway, that's why. Marco Vespucci was her husband. There's no proof that Giuliano and Simonetta had an affair, and her husband certainly did not leave her to die alone in a cold cell. In fact, she died at the age of 22, probably from tuberculosis, so she did die young and quite sadly, but not at the hands of her husband. And this is 2 years before the Pazzi conspiracy as well, so there's a little bit of fiddling timelines that goes on here. Giuliano did have a real lover. Her name was Fioretta, who was pregnant when he died, and their son Giulio was raised by Lorenzo and Clarice and went on to become Pope Clement VII, who says that you can't get anywhere being from illegitimate stock. So another problem that I had with the accuracy in this series was brotherly love. The series shows there to be this massive rivalry between Giuliano and Lorenzo, with Giuliano being a bit resentful of Lorenzo and a bit jealous that he's kind of the older brother and he's more inclined towards doing stuff with the bank, and in reality Giuliano was said to be a really kind, lovely man. He was handsome and athletic, and he was always side by side with his brother Lorenzo. He was not as stubborn and quick to anger as portrayed. He was, by all accounts, a really, really sweet guy who totally had his brother's back. I think they've just added it as a plot point so that there's kind of this resentment brewing between them, and then Giuliano is murdered and Lorenzo has to live with that guilt. But no, really, they loved each other pretty much. So Botticelli obviously did exist, and his love for Simonetta was not untrue. He used her as a model in many of his paintings. If you've noticed that the woman in The Birth of Venus, The Primavera, and Mars and Venus all look exactly the same, that's because they probably are based on the same person, and that person is Simonetta. It's highly unlikely that Giovanni posed for the Mars to her Venus, though. Botticelli is actually buried in the same church as Simonetta, the Church of Ognissanti in Florence. And his painting Fortitude, I noticed that was really nerdy of me, but his painting Fortitude wasn't completed yet in 1469, even though it hangs in the Medici kitchen. But that is really nerdy. And if we're going to be getting into the historical accuracy of facts like that, then no one likes a killjoy, do they? So I'm just going to stop. So, scenes. The Palazzo Vecchio exterior shots were actually filmed at the Palazzo de' Priori in Volterra, which is the oldest public building in Tuscany and has a really, really similar design. The Medici residence, the Palazzo Medici Riccardi, which was their townhouse, was filmed at the Piazza del Duomo in Pienza. And the shots of the city walls are the walls of Volterra. Again, the exterior of the cathedral and Duomo, as said before, did not look the way they do in the series. They did not look that way until 1887. So this is a bit disjointed, and it was with Masters of Florence as well, because I just kind of jotted things down as I was watching it. So it's kind of a little bit back and forth, but hopefully you're following me. The show portrays well the complexity of Lorenzo. I really like the depth of character that they gave him. He's a lover and a fighter. He's a studious man, but he's also the life and soul of the party. He's a peacekeeper and a war maker. He's a shrewd politician and a lover of the arts. He's charitable, yet privileged beyond anybody's wildest dreams. And he's struggling with demons, both internal and external. And I really have to say thumbs up on the portrayal of Lorenzo there. Lorenzo's sister Bianca. She did marry a Pazzi, but it wasn't for love. It was an arranged marriage that was brokered as a failed attempt to end the feud between the Medici and the Pazzi families. They did not run off into the sunset together. Bianca was also not their only sister. They had two other sisters, but don't know where they are for the purposes of the series. Mother Lucrezia would never have sat in the Priori's audience. She did, however, have Lorenzo's ear, and she helped him as an advisor and impacted his decisions, and she had a very clear understanding of politics. But again, publicly, women and politics, no. Behind closed doors, yes. So in summary, the key events are accurate. The characters were real people. The Medici are portrayed as more benevolent than 15th century politics would have been, but they're the heroes of our story, so that's fine. However, the importance of the family in influencing the Renaissance and their beef with the Pazzi family, undeniable. The timelines are somewhat flexible and events are condensed, such as the death of Lorenzo's father Piero and the lead up to the Pazzi conspiracy. The most surprising thing for me is the fact that Giuliano's son is missed out. His son with Fioretta. Is it Fioretta? I have to check this. Fioretta, yes. Giuliano's illegitimate son with Fioretta is left out. And if you've seen Da Vinci's Demons, this is a really lovely plot story. Giuliano is having an affair with this woman and he dies, and she's pregnant with his child, and the child lives. Not only does the child live, the child goes on to become Pope Clement VII, people. So I was really surprised to see him missed out. Maybe he will come to light in series 3. Who knows? As always, with anything Medici, for more information, please see Christopher Hibbert's The Rise and Fall of the House of Medici. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed my, I've been talking for too long. I just recorded an episode on Contessina Bardi, Cosimo's wife, and now I'm doing this review for a Historian Reacts, and then I'm going to go and do a Clarice Orsini video, and I'm probably going to do Catherine de Medici as well tonight. So my voice is getting a bit hoarse. I'm going to go and rest it for a bit before I film another episode, but I hope you've enjoyed this. Please let me know in the comments below which TV series, film, book, play, whatever you would like to see this historian react to. And I will see you again for another episode of Herstory or a Historian Reacts. Please give me a like, give me a subscribe. Once I get to 1,000 subscribers, I can do a poll so that you can decide on the content when I get to my community tab, which will be nice. So yes, please do subscribe and visit our Facebook page and our Instagram account, The Herstory Girls. Thank you very much as always, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.